Hello and you are welcome to this week's episode of Indo Politics. I'm Tabitha Monaghan and this week I'm joined by my colleague on the politics team, political correspondent with the Irish and Sunday Independent, Conal Thomas. Conal, it's almost a week since the presidential election ended in Dublin Castle, Catherine Connolly and her overwhelming majority in that. But we're still talking about the presidential election, but more the fallout of the presidential election, particularly for Micheál Martin. Do you want to start from the beginning on when the rumblings began? Because really it was Dublin Castle on the Saturday.
I was thinking and breathe, but no.
None of that.
I mean, we were all there on Dublin Castle for the I suppose the official declaration on Saturday, and it kind of became clear late into Saturday and early into Sunday that he was going to come under what one TD described to me on Sunday as a sort of second wave of pressure. So I suppose it would have started when there was this confusion around whether he was going to travel up from Cork to Dublin. There had originally been reports that he was not going to. And then it was subsequently clarified that he had thought he would do the 6-1 down from Cork and then travel up, but the count was earlier, so he hadn't anticipated. So anyway, up he came to Dublin. He was on stage with Catherine Connolly when she was officially declared the president. And then the next day, it kind of started slow, I guess. It was sort of, everyone was just kind of taking a bit of a breather, and it was that kind of mopping up and everything else. And Catherine Connolly, I don't think really did much. She went to the Dublin Marathon and all the rest of it. And then there started just rumblings, murmurings amongst certain TDs. As I say, the second wave of pressure was coming over Micheál Martin from the fallout of the Jim Gavin campaign fiasco.
It was just a reminder, really, wasn't it? Of how bad, because you had the screens and you had people voting for Jim Gavin. A lot of people actually voting for a candidate that had no longer decided to contest the election.
Got about 7%.
At 7%. So I'd say for some people who were already unhappy with how that election was run by Fianna Fáil, it was just like more salt in the wound to see his name up there on the screen.
Yeah. And I say that TD who described it quite aptly, saying was that second wave of pressure on Micheál Martin, and what I think it did is it's two things. It crystallised for a lot of people in Fianna Fáil and the grassroots member just the hurt and embarrassment. I mean, embarrassment's the word that's been used an awful lot the last few days. But what it also did was it gave those so-called rebels within the Fianna Fáil party another kind of stick the knife in once more. And so what we saw was Sunday evening or Sunday kind of afternoon, John McGuinness came out. He's long-time critic of Micheál Martin. In fact, one TD said to me the other day, and they said, I wouldn't put much weight past what John is. He's been critical of every Fianna Fáil leader since he was elected in 1997. I'm not sure, maybe John McGuinness would dispute that. But anyway, he came out on radio and was saying he doesn't know now if we can wait as long for a change of leader, i.e. until the EU presidency next year, which Ireland will hold the tail end, the second half of next year. And then that kind of generated a bit of noise and et cetera, et cetera. And then you John Lahart, who's Dublin TD, and wouldn't really normally be seen as somebody who would be in the kind of John McGuinness critical of Micheál Martin camp. But nonetheless, he came out in RT News late that evening saying, we all respect Micheál Martin as leader, but Fianna Fáil cannot afford these types of mistakes. And anyway, the hours went on and headed into Monday, and it kind of looked for a brief period into kind of Monday morning. There's going to be this sort of mini putsch, this mini sort of rebellion, and there was rumours going around that 10 of 12 signatures needed to trigger a no confidence motion had been garnered, and then I think Micheál Martin would have got on the phone at this time, and then it kind of dissipated, and it kind of faded away. Bear in mind, the Dáil's in recess this week. A lot of TDs back home. And the home turf, a lot of them will be abroad, they may be with their families, etc. So what looked like it could have been, but in all of this, it's the thing that everyone keeps saying, and it needs to be reiterated. No one in a position to succeed Micheál Martin has made a move.
And that's the key part here, really, is that if, let's say, 10 TDs did sign a motion of no confidence, we do need the 12 for the motion to go forward. You need somebody, let's say, like a Jim O'Callaghan or somebody else waiting in the wings who's kind of garnering this kind of momentum to push it forward, to kind of get it across the line. It might be all well and good, even if they got the 12, let's say, and they put it and it went through and it was put to a vote. potentially is where it's left. If there isn't somebody else waiting in the wings to say, well, do you know what, here's an alternative, I have an alternative to Micheál Martin. So I wonder where that goes. Like, I've spoken to TDs on kind of both sides of it this week. One of them is saying, no, there potentially could still be a motion of no confidence in Micheál Martin's leadership before Christmas. Another one is saying, look, there was mistakes made. There is this review, but we still have to respect what Micheál Martin has done for the party overall. We still owe him a lot, particularly since 2011, but also they're the largest party in the Dáil now. So I think there are a lot of TDs who are in the party who still feel like they owe Micheál Martin an awful lot. So I just wonder where it goes from here.
I think, I don't think, by the way, he's in any immediate danger. And you and I would have been listening to his spirited defence, and not too subtle criticism of some of his own TDs today on Claire Byrne. There is a potential here, though, for a third wave of pressure, and it will be when that review is handed around. Now, it's my understanding that the TDs have been asked to submit into that. It's being undertaken, as we've discussed before, by excuse me, Senior Counsel Kieran O'Loughlin. The next parliamentary party meeting will be interesting. I suspect heads will have cooled off by then. But then this review could, dredge a lot up. Again,
but it just comes back to what you're saying is a third wave of pressure. It doesn't go beyond more pressure. For now, like I think we have TDs coming out and they're going to be critical, and some will come out in their defence, and we'll see ministers, rallying around Micheál Martin. I don't see it being that massive heave at the next parliamentary party meeting.
No, and I think there's a school of thought that would tell you that the so-called rebels are kind of waiting in the long grass here, because the key thing is, if you take those who are seen as rebels, maybe the old guard who are critical, and those who are kind of Micheál Martin loyalist, in a way the party is fighting for that centre of the people who could be persuaded one way or the other. I say it comes back to the most important point, that no one's made a move. What I think is kind of maybe melting people's heads a little bit at the moment is all this talk of dates and when, and it's important. As I say, there's that potential third wave when that review is done, and what the findings of that might reveal. Then there's the Galway by-election next year, probably most likely April or May. Fianna Fáil they're already privately admitting to me that it's going to be a serious struggle for them to win that. Could that be another opportunity if they don't, to stick the knife in and manoeuvres may happen? Is it at the end of the EU presidency? Is it November 2027 next year? When the November 2027, I say, when the handover with Fine Gael happens. Look, Micheál Martin's, you heard him today, he's raring to go, not going anywhere, still has all the fight in him. I do think one of the interesting criticisms that has been levelled at him, and perhaps senior ministers in the party and government, by some TDs, most notably Malcolm Byrne, actually, who wouldn't really be considered.
I think he'd consider himself that kind of middle ground.
He would, absolutely,
TD, and said, which I thought was an interesting intervention from him, because contrary to what others were saying, and even what Micheál Martin was saying when he did that interview on RTE, they very much were focusing on the embarrassment and the frustration around the presidential election. Malcolm Byrne moved it into a completely different realm, where he was saying, no, actually, I have some frustration around housing. And in fairness, I understand what he's saying, because, okay, he's a backbencher of a government party. He still has to go back to his constituency, to his family, his friends, his constituents who are all struggling with housing, with childcare, whatever, healthcare, whatever topic that it is, and he has to answer to that, and he wants to see greater movement, more momentum there, and that was his focus and his frustration that he decided to air publicly.
It's the other side of the coin, isn't it? On the one hand, you have every Fianna Fáil TD representing their constituents utterly embarrassed and ashamed at the presidential fiasco, and on the one hand doing their J job of having to answer why disability services aren't where they need to be, why housing has slowed significantly, why transport links and infrastructure is not ramping up. What that will do is, if there's any doubts about the delivery mechanisms of the government and the decision making of those at the top of the government, which is Micheál Martin, that will bed in over time. This has already started, I suppose, the the beginning of the end, we've been calling it for a few weeks now. But if this government, I mean, Malcolm Byrne effectively threw Jack Chambers, Micheál Martin, Darragh O'Brien under the bus by saying that.
Yeah, it was interesting, but also he was saying that there's a disconnect between the backbenches and the leadership, and that they don't feel like that they're being listened to. And we know that Micheál Martin is engaging in these meetings with TDs, like groups of TDs over the last 2 weeks. Now, I think some of it had been framed earlier in the week of Micheál Martin trying to shore up support. Those meetings, my understanding is that they were organised weeks ago. They were kind of in the aftermath of that marathon PP meeting. And I spoke to one or two people who had their meetings with Micheál Martin. They said actually the leadership didn't come up, the presidency didn't come up, the election didn't come up. It was housing, it was childcare, and then it was the local issues that they were having issues with, that they wanted to bring to the party leader. So I wonder, by him doing that and having those meetings, will that help that middle ground to feel like they're being listened to, that they've had that opportunity? And Micheál Martin then again saying on that interview, I'm just a phone call away.
Yeah, I'm just a phone call away.
He said that a number of times.
This is the man and the leader of a party who is notoriously, or is notorious and has been for many years, of keeping his parliamentary party at a distance.
That top-down approach.
Taking advice from a close cadre of advisors. And it's coming back to bite him. And what he's done and what he's had to do since the Jim Gavin fiasco is he's had to hit the phones to his backbenchers. In terms of the delivery of policy and what the government is going to have to stand over at the next general election, if TDs feel they're now being listened to by their leader, it will massage them a little bit. But Micheál Martin, bear in mind, is also somebody, it's my understanding, who is constantly privately frustrated at the pace of delivery. We've heard numerous sources in Fianna Fáil the last week lambast state agencies, say there are too many of them. You know, we've Malcolm Byrne saying there are too many civil servants. So it's all a bit noisy and messy at the moment. But I guess Micheál Martin's trying to get as many of them on side as he possibly can.
Do you think it's working? Do you think it could work?
I think it could work, certainly. Yeah. I do think such is his powers of persuasion and the genuine respect that people do actually have for him.
And for what he did to the party, yeah.
Bear in mind,
for the party.
I mean, the point I suppose we kind of keep coming back to, and Micheál Martin actually said it himself, and I think it's a fair enough point, is it's remarkable to have gone from the general election less than a year ago to returning. Fianna Fáil is the largest party in local government, to returning Fianna Fáil is the largest party in government, to lead the coalition, to be in the Taoiseach's office, and then for this to happen. It's probably the single most damaging thing of his time as leader. But I do think perspective is probably setting in a little bit now. But I don't think those rebels will stop agitating. Let's
talk about the rebel list very briefly, because that was kind of an interesting kind of side story to this whole thing, that this rebel list had been drawn up by what has been said to have been a government advisor. We don't know who that person was. The Taoiseach has said it wasn't anybody in the Taoiseach's office. Nobody would do that. I'm not interested in that. That used to be, when I was a young TD, a feature of Fianna Fáil, and it wasn't good. I didn't like it. I don't want that the feature of the party now. All the same, a list was drawn up of a number of rebel TDs. John McGuinness was one of them, John Lahart was another. And then there was kind of the old guard as well. They were all lumped into one.
Willie O'D, John McGuinness,
Sean O'Friel. A number of TDs then in the rebel list as well. And then that was circulated, but it was circulated to the media as well. Some people on that rebel list were not happy they were on that rebel list.
I mean,
not saying that they necessarily didn't belong on the rebel list, but I think they were, maybe them being described as rebels, I think they felt maybe diminished their opinions, and that their opinions weren't being listened to or maybe dismissed, and that was the frustration.
And there's probably an element where some wanted to kind of work in the background a little bit and didn't want to put their head above the parapet and all of this, and then they just go, oh, this doesn't help. But I mean, like James O'Connor was one of them, right? And he's been very critical of Micheál Martin.
Compared him to Louis XIV?
Louis XIV, who was the longest serving monarch in history, 72 years. Not a comparison Micheál Martin liked at all.
Didn't, and
I
actually,
actually think he said it's quite hurtful, didn't he?
he did. He said, and not acceptable, though, those kinds of
Those
comments.
kinds of comments. Yeah, look, I mean, today Micheál Martin gave a very, as I say, rejected utterly that rebel list was drawn up by anyone from his team. He doesn't operate like that. So anyway, it's drama. But I mean, what's interesting is you there have a kind of a facsimile of what could just be added to now for the next few months. You know, if as I say, if the supposed rebels get more people on board, that's not going to be the first list.
What do you think of Micheál Martin saying that Billy Kelleher, in hindsight, could have been a better candidate?
Yeah, I thought it was an act of contrition, really. And probably, in fairness, quite honest.
Yeah.
I think it's the furthest he's kind of gone in that regard. Or, he said all along since the Jim Gavin fiasco, like, I accept responsibility, but there's been very little kind of detailed commentary around, I think he's probably had a bit of time to reflect and, I think...
But also the criticism that has been levelled at Jim Gavin, that he wasn't a seasoned politician. And maybe some voters don't want necessarily a seasoned politician, but they want somebody who can perform in the media, that can stand up and debate and engage and do well in media interviews. Jim Gavin wasn't able to do that. I mean, that was the criticism from the get-go, that he wasn't great at engaging, publicly engaging. He was great kind of talking to people on the campaign trail, but not good with the debates and the media interviews. I think we know that Billy Kelleher would have been better at that. For
sure, yes. I mean, Micheál Martin was saying today, in hindsight, maybe Billy would have been better. I mean, I think Micheál Martin also did that thing, though, where he kind of said, well, Billy didn't contact me. I didn't hear until very late that he wanted to go, the 26th of August, I think it was.
Which was a consequence, though, of the silence that was coming from leadership.
And a consequence of when it emerged that effectively Jim Gavin was going to be parachuted in by the leadership. I mean, it's a bit like what could have been, but, maybe Billy will go for it in 7 years, who knows? Yeah.
Okay, the by-election you mentioned already.
Yeah.
What do you think that this is an opportunity? Moving away, not necessarily from Fianna Fáil, for Fine Gael again to prove themselves, because they had a really bad presidential election. I know they probably would argue they did better than they thought they would with the 30-odd% that Heather Humphreys got. Is this another opportunity?
It's not good.
No, it's
not
good.
I mean, sorry, let's just cut through the spin for a minute. Okay, yeah, Mairead McGuinness dropped out, and anyway, we're not going to go over old ground. The by-election has to be moved. The rate has to be moved within the next, 6 months when Catherine Connolly becomes president, so from the
11th of November.
Yeah. And there's already candidates kind of emerging. Fine Gael will almost certainly run someone. I would be very surprised if it's not Sean Kine, the leader of the Seanad, who held the seat there from 2011 to 2020.
Who ran in the general election.
Ran the general election, I think came, was it sixth?
Sixth, yeah, I think.
And he said to me on Sunday he wasn't going to make any comment and it wouldn't be until the new year. Yeah, that's fine. That's what you'd expect. I think Fine Gael will probably go gung-ho. I don't know. At the same time, speaking to a few Fine Gael TDs the last few days, some of them are kind of calling for a bit of an open debate at the next parliamentary party meeting around the... was there maybe a rush to select Heather?
I mean, in fairness,
with Sean Kelly coming out saying
he was shafted.
He was shafted.
Literally saying that, I wonder, because you want to compare why Fianna Fáil, Micheál Martin is coming under such pressure and Simon Harris isn't coming in for as much pressure and criticism. We're not seeing the same. We're hearing Sean Kelly and maybe some TD saying, okay, we need to ask some questions, we need to reflect, we need to review, which I think any party and any TD would say when you don't win an election.
Yeah, Fine Gael, I mean, have they stopped doing dissent?
Yeah.
And bear in mind, a lot of Fine Gael TDs are first-time TDs. The party went through this huge process of renewal, effectively. Yes. So you wouldn't have some of the old guard there, say, necessarily the same like Willie O'Dea or John McGuinness and Fianna Fáil who would stand up and be a critical. I do think the by-election, though, is Sinn Féin's to lose.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because, where that split in the left that was so united for the Connolly campaign.
They'll have to go up and against each other now.
We'd Mary Lou McDonald come out immediately within hours saying that Sinn Féin be running its own candidate. At least there won't be a united left candidate, or at least they will not be backing a united left candidate. But bear in mind, Mairead Farrell, the TD, topped the poll there last time. So they've a good chance that they can probably find the right candidate. Labour might contest. I believe Aon too are probably going to be as well. And then we've Noel Thomas, the Independent Ireland former Fianna Fáil councillor, who
did very well.
You just missed out just on in the 5-seater. I think he was 6th, maybe Sean Conn was actually 7th. He confirmed to me that he certainly wants to go, but you know, due process of party process, get the backing of the members. So that'll be
So does Fine Gael have to have a process to select a candidate? Do you think that could be potentially the lesson that Fine Gael learns from that? If Simon Harris isn't coming in for criticism and scrutiny, is that where the criticism is going to come for Fine Gael? Because we saw when Mairead McGuinness stepped back and Heather Humphreys was kind of, who when she announced actually really, there was an avalanche of parliamentary party members coming out in support of Heather Humphreys. It became very obvious very quickly that Sean Kelly was going to be up against it, trying to either get the nomination or go through the process to contest, let alone win.
I think it's the whole selection process around the presidential candidates is a massive lesson for every party. And I don't think any party will want to rush into anything in selecting a candidate or candidates. There seem to be some suggestion that Fianna Fáil would run too, which I can't see happening. But anyway, so there won't, I don't think, be any rush into that. But in all these things, I suppose it's about who wants to go for it, who wants to put their name forward. There's, you know, like as I was saying earlier, there's already been some talk about whether Fianna Fáil has a bad one. Does that, you know, is that going to be a fourth wave of pressure on Micheál Martin? But it's going to be sometime, and no different to ourselves, Tabitha. I don't think anyone's in a rush for another election or by-election.
I know, I'm almost loath to even talk about a by-election now at the moment. I want to move on to Taoiseach Simon Harris's comments on migration on Wednesday. I think he was on his way into cabinet, and he basically said, in no uncertain terms, migration is too high, which is a stronger comments than we've heard from him or anybody really in government.
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways I think of looking at this. Firstly, you'd actually both Micheál Martin, the Taoiseach, and Pascal Dunn, the Minister of Finance, basically both coming out backing those comments and agreeing with them. The government has taken measures to speed up decisions, increase the number of deportations. I think the criticism of Simon Harris's comments was well articulated by Gary Gannon today, the Social Democrats TD, where he effectively said that the Taoiseach is being a commentator when he is in fact implementing policy, a legislator at the head of government, effectively. Obviously, this will be arising from City West. It arises from the spoiled votes and some of the comments. There was
a lot of migration on the spoiled votes.
A lot of migration on on that. I think there was a little bit of frustration in Fianna Fáil today about those comments. Just speaking to a few people privately.
What in particular was frustrating them?
I think what they would. One or two people I spoke to saw it as maybe a little bit of a veiled criticism of Jim O'Callaghan as Justice Minister. Now, there are very few people in the political system at the moment who would criticise Jim O'Callaghan, and the point they were making, because he seemed to have been very effective in his role so far, but I think they were making the point that Jim O'Callaghan, now this is a very Fianna Fáil way of looking at it, this is just spin, but there's some truth to it, that Jim O'Callaghan has done more in his 9 months as Justice Minister than Helen McEntee did in 5 years. Bear in mind, Heather Humphreys was in there, and Simon Harris himself was in there for a brief period as well. So I think they took it as a little bit of a slight. But yeah, I mean, I think it's not unusual for Simon Harris to make that kind of comment on the back of something that has obviously awoken, you know, another discussion around this, because it had kind of gone off the boil a little bit as a topic, you know, and as an issue. So
can we expect stronger rhetoric then, do you think, from government ministers in general?
I think the rhetoric since the coalition's taken power has been relatively strong. Jim O'Callaghan very early on saying certain things are not acceptable, you know, decision makings need
fair but firm system.
Fair but firm, exactly. And that kind of rhetoric has continued. And in many ways, I think Simon Harris was echoing that. It just happens to have been first in a while that someone has had to make those comments, I suppose.
Yeah, and finally, just to throw forward to the weekend a bit, we will have a poll in the Sunday Independent. First one after the presidential election, really. What do you think are going to be the big standout things? Do you think really it's actually going to be a look at party standing, Micheál Martin's approval? Is that what we're going to be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Fianna Fáil Micheál Martin angle will be the one to keep an eye on. Bear in mind that Fianna Fáil have been quite low in the last two successive polls, and we're at 17 in the Red Sea poll there last week, was it? Or the week that was last week. And it was interesting because publicly you had Micheál Martin on radio today saying, as he always does, pay no attention to the
I never pay attention to them.
I already told you about the opinion poll.
Yeah.
I believe is at one point was he told.
Would you stop about
I already told you anyway. And then you people in his party today saying he really shouldn't ignore them as much as he should, because
especially if there's a trend.
If there's a trend, and 17 was where they were when they nearly imploded in 2011.
Yeah.
So it will be a big concerning trend. And then, keep an eye on perhaps who people might want to see as the next leader.
Yeah. Conal, I think we'll leave it there. And thank you so much for watching this week's episode of Indo Politics. As I said, the Sunday Independent will have a poll with Ireland Thinks, which you will be able to see online, some bits of it on Saturday evening, but obviously will be in the paper on Sunday. And don't forget to subscribe to the Irish Independent's YouTube channel.